When I first met John, it felt like a dream. He was charming, thoughtful, and full of promises for a future that seemed bright and secure. Despite our age difference, we connected in ways I thought were rare. He made me feel special, like I was the center of his world. When we married, I was just 18, wide-eyed and full of hope for the life we would build together. Our early years were simple but beautiful. We lived in a modest home, and John worked hard to provide for us while I took care of the house. I remember how he'd come home after long days at work, still finding time to ask me about my day or to sit with me as we planned for our future. When our first daughter was born, it felt like everything was falling into place. We were a family, united and happy. As years passed, we welcomed another baby into our lives. The joy of having a new child brought a sense of renewal to our family, reminding us of the bond we had. I devoted myself to being a mother and wife, ensuring that our home was filled with love and care. But even in those happy moments, there were faint cracks in the picture-perfect life we had built. John occasionally became distant, brushing off my questions about his long hours or late-night work meetings. At the time, I ignored it, convincing myself that every marriage had its challenges. After all, we had been through so much together. Why would I question the foundation of our love? Little did I know, those small cracks were the first signs of the storm that would shatter everything we had built. It started with subtle changes, barely noticeable at first. John, who had always been present at the dinner table, started coming home late more often. At first, he explained it as long hours at work or unexpected meetings. I believed him because, after all these years, why wouldn't I? But as the days turned into weeks, his excuses became more frequent and his presence in our family life dwindled. I noticed other things too, small details that didn't seem important on their own, but added up to something I couldn't ignore. He stopped asking about my day or engaging with the children the way he used to. When I tried to talk to him about our younger daughter's milestones or our older daughter's school achievements, he seemed distracted, barely listening. Something was different, and deep down I could feel it. The moment that truly triggered my suspicions came one evening when John received a call while we were watching television. He quickly silenced the phone and placed it face down on the table. That wasn't like him. Usually he'd answer calls in front of me without hesitation. When I asked who it was, he brushed it off with a vague, just work stuff. But the way he avoided my gaze and fumbled for an explanation sent a chill down my spine. For the first time in our marriage, I felt he was hiding something from me. As the days went on, his behavior became even more guarded. He took his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, and he'd lower his voice whenever he answered a call. My mind raced with possibilities, but the one that kept surfacing, the one I didn't want to admit, was that John might be seeing someone else. One night when John was fast asleep, I found myself sitting in the living room, unable to sleep. My thoughts were consumed by his strange behavior. Against my better judgment, I decided to check his phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, terrified of what I might find. I scrolled through his messages and call history, and there it was, a series of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. The messages were casual but unmistakable. The tone was light, playful, and far too familiar for a work colleague. My heart sank, and my stomach churned as I pieced together the truth. The texts hinted at dinners, gifts and plans that had nothing to do with me or our family. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized that the man I had trusted, the father of my children, was sharing his life with someone else. I waited until the next day to confront him, gathering the courage to say the words out loud. When the time came, my voice was shaky, but I asked him directly, "John, who is she? Do you have someone else?" For a moment, his face betrayed a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "Why are you making a problem out of nothing?" he snapped. "You're being paranoid, Anna. Stop overthinking things." His defensive tone only confirmed my suspicions. Instead of addressing my concerns, he dismissed them outright, leaving me feeling small and insignificant. I wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that I was imagining things, but the evidence was undeniable. That night I lay awake beside him, the distance between us now more than just physical. The man I thought I knew, the life we had built together, suddenly felt like a fragile illusion, and for the first time I questioned whether our love had ever been as unshakable as I had believed. The nagging questions in my mind refused to go away. I needed proof, something concrete that would leave no room for doubt or denial. One morning, while John was at work, I decided to go through our phone bill. My hands shook as I unfolded the statement, each line feeling like a potential landmine. And there it was, plain as day. The same number, called almost daily, at all hours of the day and night. Sometimes he called this number before coming home, other times during lunch breaks or even on weekends. My chest tightened as I stared at the evidence. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't paranoia. It was real. My husband, the man I had spent nearly 2 decades with, was sharing his life with someone else. But who was she? And why had John chosen her over me and our family? I couldn't hold back any longer. I needed answers, even if they tore me apart. With a deep breath, I dialed the number. The phone rang, and with each ring my anxiety grew. Finally, a woman's voice answered, light and cheerful, as if she didn't have a care in the world. "Hello?" she said. Her tone alone made my heart sink. I hesitated, but managed to say, "Who is this?" There was a pause, and then she responded, "I think you know who I am." My heart pounded in my chest. Are you with my husband?" My voice cracked, and I felt tears welling up. She didn't deny it. Instead, she laughed softly, a sound that felt like a slap in the face. "Listen, this is your problem, not mine," she said coldly. "If your husband chooses to be with me, maybe you should ask yourself why." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I hung up the phone, unable to continue the conversation. My hands trembled as I held the phone, the reality of the situation settling in. John had chosen someone else, someone who didn't care about the pain she was causing. That evening, when John returned home, I confronted him again. This time I had the phone bill in hand, undeniable proof of his betrayal. "John," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I know everything. I called her." He froze for a moment, his face unreadable. Then, instead of showing remorse or regret, his expression turned to anger. "Why are you snooping around?" he demanded. "You have no right to invade my privacy." "No right?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I'm your wife. We have 2 children. I have every right to know why you're tearing our family apart." John's voice grew louder, more hostile. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Stop acting like a detective. I'll end it when I want to. You don't control me." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't even denying it anymore. Instead, he was asserting his power, as if my feelings and our family meant nothing to him. The man I had loved for so long had become a stranger, someone who seemed incapable of empathy or accountability. In a desperate attempt to understand, I asked, "Why, John? Why are you doing this to us? To me? To your daughters?" He sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of the house and kids, I wouldn't need someone else." His words were meant to wound, and they succeeded. He was blaming me for his actions, making me feel as though his betrayal was my fault. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the depth of his selfishness. No apology, no remorse, just excuses and anger. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. My trust was shattered, my heart broken, and my family's future uncertain. The man I had built my life around was slipping further away, and I didn't know how to stop it. The days that followed felt like a blur of pain and confusion. I couldn't sleep, and when I did, my dreams were filled with fragments of memories, happier times that now felt like cruel reminders of what I'd lost. My body felt heavy, as though the weight of my broken heart had seeped into my bones. Even eating became a chore. The stress was consuming me, and it wasn't long before my physical health began to reflect my emotional turmoil. When I visited the doctor, he told me I needed to rest, but rest felt impossible with everything falling apart around me. The impact on our family was undeniable. My older daughter, once so full of life, had become withdrawn. She barely spoke to her friends, choosing instead to isolate herself in her room. I overheard her crying one night, and when I tried to comfort her, she simply said, "Why is Dad doing this to us?" Her voice broke my heart all over again. She had even tried to talk to John, pleading with him to stop, but his response had been cruel and dismissive. He shouted at her, called her names, and told her to mind her own business. The father she had idolized was now a source of pain and shame. And then there was my baby, blissfully unaware of the chaos around her. Her innocence was both a comfort and a heartache. She didn't know that her family was crumbling or that her father was barely present anymore. But I knew, and I worried endlessly about her future. Would she grow up in a broken home? Would she ever understand why her father chose someone else over his family? John's absences grew more frequent. He stopped coming home some nights, claiming to be working late. Other times, he would leave early in the morning without so much as a goodbye. When he was home, his mood was volatile, and he spent most of his time on his phone or avoiding us altogether. The financial strain became another battle to fight. Our savings were depleting faster than I could keep track. I discovered receipts for extravagant dinners and gifts, all for her. Meanwhile, our bills piled up, and I began to worry about how we would manage to pay for the apartment, the groceries, or even the basics for our children. The home that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a prison. Every corner reminded me of what we had been, and every moment felt like a reminder of how far we had fallen. I felt alone, powerless, and invisible in my own life. My daughters were hurting, our finances were crumbling, and the man who was supposed to be my partner was the one tearing everything apart. The weight of it all was suffocating, and I couldn't see a way out. As the days turned into weeks, the financial strain in our household became impossible to ignore. The apartment loan, which had always been a manageable expense when John and I worked together, now felt like a mountain I could never climb alone. The savings we had worked so hard to build were rapidly disappearing. Month after month, I noticed withdrawals and unexplained transactions. When I confronted John, he brushed off my concerns with vague assurances, saying, "I'll handle it, don't worry." But I couldn't stop worrying. The numbers didn't add up. With every passing month, there was less money for groceries, bills, and the basic needs of our daughters. Meanwhile, I found evidence of John's extravagant spending, receipts for expensive restaurants, boutique stores, and even jewelry. None of these things were for me or our family. They were for her. The realization made my stomach churn. Not only was John emotionally neglecting us, but he was also diverting the resources we desperately needed to maintain our lives. John's financial control became another weapon in his arsenal of manipulation. He knew I was on leave from work to care for our youngest daughter, and he exploited that vulnerability. "You can't manage without me," he would say whenever I tried to assert myself. "If you keep pushing, I'll leave, and you'll see how hard life is without me." His words weren't just a threat. They were a declaration of power. He knew that I was trapped, both emotionally and financially. For the first time in my life, I felt completely dependent on someone who was betraying me. I thought about going back to work, but the logistics seemed impossible. Who would care for the baby? How would I balance work with the emotional weight of everything happening at home? And even if I did return to work, it wouldn't solve the larger issue. The man who was supposed to be my partner was actively sabotaging our family. John's dominance extended beyond money. He used it to justify his actions and silence my protests. When I asked why he was spending so much, he'd respond coldly, "I earn the money, so I'll decide how it's spent." Every time he said it, I felt a little smaller, as if my contributions to our family, raising our children, managing the household, supporting him, meant nothing. His dismissiveness wasn't just about control, it was about erasing my worth. I found myself caught in an unbearable dilemma. On one hand, I loved John. I clung to the memories of who he had been, hoping against hope that he might change. On the other hand, I couldn't continue living like this, ignored, betrayed, and powerless, but leaving him felt impossible. How would I support my daughters? How would I manage the loan? And deep down, I wasn't sure I was ready to give up on the dream of the family we had once been. The power imbalance wasn't just about money, it was about the choices I no longer felt I had. In the depths of my despair, I turned to my best friend Sarah for advice. Sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, I poured my heart out, recounting every detail of John's betrayal. She listened intently, her face a mixture of anger and sadness. When I finally finished, her words were direct. "Anna, you deserve better. Maybe it's time to leave him." Her suggestion hit me like a wave. Part of me wanted to agree, to walk away and start fresh. But the other part, the part that still clung to hope, couldn't imagine leaving. "I can't," I whispered. "What about the girls? The apartment? How would I manage on my own?" Sarah reached for my hand, her grip firm. "You're stronger than you think, but you need to decide what's best for you and your daughters." I also sought advice from my family, hoping for some clarity. Their response was more cautious. "Give it time," my mother said, her voice filled with hope. "Maybe John will come to his senses and realize what he's losing." While they meant well, their optimism only deepened my despair. They couldn't see the man John had become, the man who dismissed my pain and put his desires above our family. Despite their support, I felt utterly alone. Sarah and my family offered words of encouragement, but neither truly understood the weight of my reality. No one could tell me how to escape the trap I was in. Financially dependent, emotionally drained, and clinging to the hope that John might change. Their well-meaning advice only amplified the isolation I felt, as if my struggles were mine to bear alone, with no clear way forward. One evening, John casually announced that he was planning a trip. "I need a break," he said, avoiding eye contact. My heart sank as I asked, "Can we come with you?" His response was cold and dismissive. "No, I want to go alone." The rejection stung deeply. After everything we'd been through, he didn't even pretend to want me or the girls by his side. In the days leading up to his trip, I stumbled upon more evidence of his growing detachment. Among his things, I found receipts for extravagant dinners and gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, even a stay at a luxury hotel. None of it was for me or our family. My suspicions turned into bitter certainty. John wasn't just abandoning us emotionally. He was funneling our shared resources into his affair. When John left for his trip, he didn't bother to call or check in. Days passed without a word. At night I lay awake, consumed by anxiety and despair. His absences became more frequent, and when he did come home, his presence felt like a formality. He offered no explanations, only anger when I asked where he'd been. The constant stress began to erode my health. I felt weak, barely able to function. My reflection in the mirror became unrecognizable. Tired eyes, pale skin, a shell of who I used to be. Worse, I began to question my worth. Was I not enough for him anymore? Had I failed as a wife? These moments marked a breaking point. I realized that John's actions weren't just tearing apart our family, they were breaking me. Yet even as I faced this harsh truth, I felt paralyzed, unable to imagine a way forward. In the quiet moments when John was away and the house was still, I found myself consumed by conflicting thoughts. How could the man I once adored, the man who held my hand as we welcomed our daughters into the world, be the same person tearing our family apart? The memories of our early years lingered, like a faint light in the darkness, but they were overshadowed by the harsh reality of his actions. I wrestled with my feelings, torn between love and anger. Part of me still loved him, clinging to the hope that he might remember the family we built and the promises we made. But another part of me, the part growing stronger each day, saw the truth clearly. John wasn't the man I thought he was. He had changed, and no amount of love or patience could bring back who he used to be. My daughter's faces haunted me the most. Our older daughter, once so vibrant and cheerful, was now subdued, her smiles rare and her eyes clouded with sadness. And my baby, so innocent, so unaware, deserved a better example of what family and love should look like. What kind of future would they have if I stayed in this broken relationship? What kind of mother would I be if I let them believe this was normal? Amid the chaos, small glimmers of strength began to emerge. I started to imagine a life without John, a life where I could find peace and stability for myself and my daughters. It was terrifying to think about, but for the first time, it didn't seem impossible. Slowly, the idea took root. Maybe I could survive without him. Maybe I could rebuild piece by piece and give my girls the life they deserved. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, with the weight of everything bearing down on me, a thought surfaced. I couldn't keep living like this. My daughters needed a strong, stable mother, and I couldn't be that for them if I continued to let John's actions control my life. It was time to take back some of the power I'd lost. I started with small, deliberate steps. I called a local lawyer to understand my options, even if I wasn't ready to take any drastic action yet. Knowing my rights gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt in a long time. I also began looking into part-time work, something I could manage while still caring for the baby. Even the idea of earning my own money felt like a breath of fresh air, a chance to regain some independence. I reached out to Sarah again, and this time I was ready to listen. Her unwavering support gave me the courage to think beyond my immediate pain. She reminded me that I wasn't alone, and slowly I began to believe it. My family, too, encouraged me to focus on what was best for myself and my daughters, even if it meant stepping away from John. When John came home that evening, I was waiting for him. For the first time in weeks, I stood firm. I confronted him, not with accusations, but with boundaries. "This ends now, John," I said. "You need to decide, your family or your affair. I won't live like this anymore." He didn't take it well, as I expected, but this time his anger didn't crush me. For the first time, I felt something stronger than fear, a resolve to reclaim my life, with or without him. The days that followed were far from easy, but they marked the beginning of something new, a chapter where I began to focus on myself and my daughters. John's behaviour remained unchanged. He still came and went as he pleased, his priorities clear. Yet for the first time, I no longer allowed his actions to dictate my every emotion. I started finding small victories in reclaiming control over my life. I updated my resume, applied for part-time jobs, and enrolled in an online course to improve my skills. The thought of contributing financially to my family, even in a small way, filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to rebuild. With Sarah's help, I found a support group for women going through similar challenges. Sharing my story and hearing theirs gave me a sense of belonging and the strength to keep moving forward. My daughters became my greatest source of motivation. I wanted them to see that even in the face of heartbreak, it was possible to rise again. John's future with his girlfriend remained uncertain, and I no longer tried to control it. My focus shifted to creating a safe, stable home for my children and myself. The road ahead wasn't clear, and fear of the unknown still lingered. But amid the uncertainty there was hope, a quiet yet steady reminder that I was stronger than I ever realized. As I put my daughters to bed one evening, my older one hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Those words were a light in the darkness, a sign that I was on the right path. No matter what lay ahead, I knew I was finally taking the first steps toward healing and freedom. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe and share. Your support means everything and helps us bring more heartfelt stories to light. Together we can inspire hope and resilience.